Today I'm going to be re-splicing this climbing line for my coworker. Recently it was inspected and they found that there were a lot of nicks up around the splice area. So it failed inspection, so we're going to be cutting off this section and re-splicing it. But in order to re-splice rope, one of the most important things to do is to do a rope inspection before you splice it, because you want to make sure it's actually worth re-splicing the rope that you're addressing. So the first thing is to go over the rope, and we're going to be looking for mechanical damage. The common mechanical damage is things like nicks, glazing, extreme abrasion, and inconsistencies in the diameter. Maybe it's crushed, you'll be able to see that it'll be super floppy, or just any kind of diameter inconsistency is something you want to look for. In UHMPE core ropes, sometimes there will be more of a core swelling due to an overload than constriction. And you almost don't even need your eyes for this part. You'll be able to feel most of those imperfections just by simply flaking the whole rope through your hand. It's good to look at the rope, but basically anything that you can feel in the rope is worth addressing and looking at and deciding whether or not you want to fail. And I get people ask how many nicks is unacceptable, or how much abrasion is unacceptable, or how much glazing is unacceptable. If you can feel it, then just get rid of it, because you don't want to be using a climbing rope that's all messed up. I know climbing ropes are good for so much weight, so some of you want to dismiss the safety issue, but I would just say if you can feel it's messing up your climbing, you should just get rid of it. Have everything function smoothly. You shouldn't cut with a dull saw, so why would you climb with a rope that's all bumpily, The next thing, if we check everything and it feels all good mechanically, is just to do some observations to make sure that there's no chemical or UV damage. Any chemical exposure can usually be smelled. A lot of the solvents that we work with, mainly just gasoline, has a pretty strong smell. So if you can smell that on the rope, then it's a good idea to retire that section of the rope, because solvents and plastic do not mix well together. For things like oil, usually you'll be able to see oil contamination. If you look at one section of the rope and then there's a darker section on the rope, then you know that that area has been exposed to motor oil or bar oil or whatever. And then when it comes to UV exposure, there will just be a fading of the dye, and the best way to see the extent of UV exposure, in my opinion, is to gently ply apart the cover and see the parts of the cover that are usually hidden. The way everything's woven, not everything's exposed to the sun. So if you can kind of look around on the inside and see what the original color was compared to what you're looking at, then that can give you some clue to how severe the UV damage is. But just in general, if it's a pretty pastel colored rope, maybe you don't want to use it anymore. Now we've inspected our rope, and other than the nicks at this splice, we haven't found anything wrong with it, so we're going to continue with going ahead and splicing it. And a consideration that I would encourage you to make is usually, we splice ropes because we want to climb doubled rope. Splicing your rope makes climbing double rope really seamless. And if you're climbing double rope a lot, that usually means that you're going to be putting a lot of wear on the side that the eye is on. So if someone is having you re-splice a rope, then the best thing to do usually is not to re-splice it from the end that the splice was originally on, because usually the tail of the rope will be much more unused. So it's a good idea to flip the rope, and we're actually going to splice the other end of the rope so that we can splice some of this newer material, because it's really hard to splice used rope. So if you can find a better end of the rope, it's going to be a lot easier to splice that end. And if the rope's really dirty, then make sure that you wash it before you splice it, because that's going to make your life a lot easier. If it's a really worn rope, sometimes I'll splice it while it's still wet, because it makes the berries just a little bit easier. So now that we've completed our inspection and we're planning on splicing the rope, the other important thing to do is make sure we can identify the rope. You have to identify the rope to know which splicing method to use. So I can just tell from the cover I recognize this rope. This is Samson Arbor Freak Sequoia, I think. And so this is a 16-strand rope, so we're going to be doing the Samson 16-strand eye splice. If you're unable to recognize the rope, then sometimes if you kind of ply apart the core and pull out some of the core strands, there will be a tracer in the core of the rope that will usually at least tell you the manufacturer and the date that it was manufactured, and sometimes it'll also tell you the model and diameter of the rope that rope. And that's important because textiles have a shelf life of 10 years and a 5-year kind of work use life as soon as you put it into service. And that's the maximum. So if you splice a rope, I have had people give me ropes that were pretty exactly 10 years old, and I could tell because they were Teufelberger ropes, which always have good tracers in them. Teufelberger and Sterling usually have the best rope tracers, but this Samson, I guess, does not have a tracer at all in it, but I can recognize it, and I know that this model of rope has not, or this colorway of this rope has not been out for that long, so I know that it can't possibly be more than 5 years old. So now that we've done our inspection and identified the rope, we've kind of done all of our due diligence, and now it's just time to splice it. And there we have another used rope spliced. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.